This video is going to be a little bit different because it's not even really for you all, the viewers, but I promise I'm going to make it as entertaining as possible. This is actually a love letter to the developers of Diablo 4 as one of their resident Necromancer enjoyers. One who has spent the entirety of this season putting a lot of effort into playing the new Minion archetype. And by new, I mean actually just a revival of the Season 0 and 1 Minion archetype, all based around the Ring of Mendeln, which we're going to discuss a little bit later in the video, but at the very least, this build, which went from complete obscurity up to one of the strongest builds ever in Season 4, back down to low to mid C tier in Season 5, but in Season 6 has regained its status as one of the strongest Necromancer builds out there, with the ability to output billions of DPS on endgame gear. Pretty impressive. But I told you that I was going to keep this entertaining. Well, I actually have a little game that we're going to play. We're going to go through a hypothetical situation where I'm going to describe a new core skill coming to the Necromancer. Just a brand new concept, something that we've never seen before. And I want you to sound off down in the comments if you figure out where I'm going with this before I finish. Let me know what you thought I was going for. And it's going to come along with a lot of caveats because it has to be interesting. It has to be differentiated. Else, why would we add it to the game? Like some of the other core skills, it's not really going to come online until you find a build-defining unique. In this case, it's going to be a ring that's just going to basically completely outperform the damage of your base core skill. Think very similarly to Blight with Ebon Piercer at this point, where the moment that you get this unique item, you kind of didn't care about the skill anymore, but I promise you it's going to be really strong and you're going to enjoy it. Is that okay? All right, let's add a few more things to it. You're not really going to be able to aim your damage. Like, you can't really choose where the damage goes. You kind of can. Like, if you're willing to corpse tendrils everything into a small area, it kind of can't miss. But the moment that anything else shows up on screen, it just has a random chance to go anywhere. But I promise it's really, really strong. It does a ton of damage. Are we still okay with that? Now, it's going to be a projectile. Well, it's kind of a projectile. It's a projectile in the way that it can be stopped by waller monsters. It's a projectile in the way that it can be stopped by suppressor fields. It's a projectile in the way that it can just get stopped by any random little bit of map terrain or a barrel, or literally just get caught around a corner. It's a really wonky projectile. It needs to be in melee range for it to hit, but it is still a projectile. Is that going to be okay? You know, it's kind of very similar to Bone Spirit. This thing is a projectile, but you end up just shotgunning it into the face of whatever you're fighting with. This is actually pretty thematic for the Necromancer. The majority of builds end up just standing in the middle of the monsters and just shotgunning into it so that it doesn't have a chance to mess up. I think we're still cool with that, right? Okay, let's move on. What if crowd control effects could apply to your projectile, could apply to your core skill? Like, it could get frozen mid-flight. Now, I know the Necromancer could get crowd controlled, but luckily the Necromancer has ways of gaining unstoppable. So even if that does happen, you can kind of get out of it and go right back to fighting. But this projectile can be crowd controlled, meaning that as you're standing there trying to output your damage, when you successfully don't get feared, your projectile can just go flying off. Or maybe your projectile can get stunned or frozen or dazed or immobilized or blinded. Are you still okay with it? What if your projectile could die? As in, like, mid-flight, it could actually take enough damage to die. Now, you're going to be spamming the projectile all the time because you actually need to get a bunch of buffs on your build, but it can just die. And that means that any buffs that you had applied to it, whatever, are going to take some time to work their way back up. I know it's getting a little heavy-handed here, but we need to make this interesting. We need to make it different than anything the Necromancer's seen before. There's only a few more things. What if when you died, you actually couldn't even use the skill for a little while? Because you actually need to kill monsters before you can get enough ammo to be able to use your skill again, but you won't have a skill to be able to kill the monsters to get the ammunition. You got to come up with different ways of being able to find ammunition. Like, maybe you have a skill that has a small % chance to just make ammunition whenever you hit something with a different skill, like one of your utility skills. Once you get all of your ammunition back, though, you can go back to using the skill. And in fact, it's almost like it's just a weird detriment to people who are dying in content that's a little bit too hard for them, but are willing to keep trying to push on forward through those stats without giving up. It's like a nice little penalty that you got to kind of pay because you had the audacity and not be good enough to stay alive. Are you still stoked about using this brand new core skill that I brought to you? I assume at this point, you're probably not that excited to try out my new skill. I also assume that if you actually went and engaged down in the comments, I'd be able to read a ton of people who said, hey, Mac, that was a bit heavy-handed. It was a little bit too much. We got it way too early. Well, I just wanted to paint this picture because this is some pretty strong feelings that I've been experiencing while piloting the Minion build in this season. Something that is insane to say, considering it's never been stronger. And just like you saw in that last Pit 89 run, and if we get to the end of this one, you'll see again, my frustration was not alleviated by putting more time in, more theory crafting in, and more thought into the build. Well, I think that I've come to what is going to be considered one of the more optimal ways of playing the Minion build while using a Golem, which I personally think is one of the only ways to actually enjoy playing the build at this point. I didn't want to walk away with this feeling, but I do think that needs to be said, because just like in Season 4, Minions are currently experiencing this weird dual reality, where the vast majority of people who are playing it, who find their Ring of Men down and just start blasting content, are going to feel amazing, just like I did, up until around Pit Tier 85. And this may not apply to the vast majority of players, and that's perfectly fine. I'm glad that more people are just happy doing it than aren't. But I don't think that it needs to be a black and white. I don't think it needs to be an either or. I don't think it needs to be anything other than porque no los dos. I think that the two different, very, very different types of people who tend to enjoy Necromancer play can both have what they want. But I do think at a fundamental level, it does require the developers to agree with the necessity that I'm going to detail here. And the reason why I say that is because we already have a pretty good idea of what at least major people in the development team think about when we consider minions and what they need to be able to do.
Minions.
Let's talk about
Necromancer
minions.
minions.
Let's talk about minions really quickly.
Minions are really hard to make really well. We did index where we wanted the player that has all of them, because that's the one you're really talking about right now. We did want them to still have some gameplay and some thinking. That's why we have the skeletal priest mechanic. Mm-hmm. You manually raise your skeletons and have to kind of manage it. Yep. The design idea behind it was that you're really focused on empowering your minions and keeping them all alive.
Yeah.
That was actually like, from the zoomed out, Blizzard dev perspective, what we wanted it to be.
Okay.
I think it's been currently a little bit too difficult or your bang for your buck is a little bit too hard, like it's too much required of you.
Coming from Diablo 2, minions feel fantastic. And it is because we have the ability to proactively tell them who to attack. Mm-hmm. I know I've been banging this drum for a while. You made it so that at least curses initiate them in combat. What are the chances, if I keep harassing you, that eventually we get some kind of, they'll at least...
More promises. I'm so scared of promises. I'll tell you this.
How do you feel about that concept?
I'll tell you this, yeah. I'm not completely against the concept. Mm-hmm. I think there's probably room for it. It's about doing it right. There is a line that makes me nervous, I guess. Okay. About, like, if you go completely into telling them who to attack, now we have increased your APM requirement and your skill requirement yet again to play a minion build. So doing it in the right way, where they do what you want more often, and maybe you can direct them, but not completely, where you're telling them.
I'm not playing StarCraft 2.
I don't want you to play StarCraft 2 when you're playing Necro, but I do want you to be more happy than I think you are right now.
Right.
With how often they go and do something kind of silly and dumb and you have no recourse.
Right.
I'll say that. That's why, like, before we launched, we were hoping the answer would be you can direct your golem and be fairly active with that.
Right.
And tell them, go here, do this.
Yep.
And we thought between that and the skeletal priest, that is a good amount of balance between APM and directing and freedom and lack of APM. But as we get the feedback, I think it's more and more people are preferring to have a little bit more control.
So in that clip, I was interviewing Adam Jackson, the lead live class designer for Diablo 4, basically the head honcho of class design and the development as it moves forward and the game continues to expand. He's an amazing dude. He's one of the smartest people I've ever talked to, and I really love picking his brain about just what it means to develop a video game and what you need to consider when you're doing that. I think the point that he makes in that clip is a very important one, but I believe that it similarly falls into this idea of a false dichotomy, an either or, when it just doesn't need to be. And this brings me to my first point, this idea of the two different Necromancer enjoyers, the two different people who are looking for a class fantasy out of the Necromancer, and why they're kind of at odds with one another. Now, this is going to be a gross generalization, and let me know down in the comments if it doesn't quite exactly match how you experience the class, how you play the class, because I think getting more perspectives here is one of the best ways forward when generating this critique. Because I do hope to positively impact this situation by making the video. I don't just kind of want to sit here yapping for no reason, but let me know down in the comments. There are two kinds of people who like to play the Necromancer, and both of them tend to love minions, but they love them for two very different reasons. There are the no thoughts, just monster killing. I want to watch these little guys run around causing mayhem and doing all the work for me. You know, gamer dad, 7 kids, 5 minutes to play every single day who just want to throw in a ring of sacrilegious soul, a ring of men down. They want to be unkillable inside of a little pocket of barrier and fortitude, and they want their minions to slaughter everything on the ground, and then they can just pick up their loot. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, nobody is wrong for wanting to play the game in whatever way they want to. But then there are also people who want to enjoy all of the content that is in Diablo 4 to a competent level. And the issue is that the developers have added in a ton of amazingly fun and challenging and interesting content for you to go do. Why would that be a problem? Well, all of that content isn't mindless, sitting in a single point, not moving, just slurping up loot styles of gameplay. Every new content type that they have added to this game requires precision, accuracy, quick movement, huge mobility, with the ability to pick and choose who you're killing at any given time. You need to kill specific damage resistance aura monsters who are going to stop you from being able to apply damage to the elite monsters who are the actual threat to you. There are suppressor fields, which have long been one of the banes of the minion's existence because your minions don't run into the circle and start attacking on them. They're more than happy to slam on the outsides of that guy until, I don't know, it eventually drops out of boredom. They've added in the Infernal Horde here, where your ability to move to specific objectives within an area and pinpoint target either etheric masses, aether lords, hellborn, sit inside of spires, targeting specific monsters in different areas to be able to proc effects is incredibly important to your overall success rate. They've added in the Undercity, a time trial precision metric high strategy run system where you need to be able to pinpoint specific targets to be able to save additional time, to be able to generate additional progress. You need to be able to kill the damage resistant auras again to be able to then target the time saving monsters. You need to be able to move and kill monsters quickly, react to changes in the environment very fast. And while this is fairly easy to overcome with a combination of aspects that ultimately make you weaker and all of your minions weaker, but at least your golem gets to react more quickly with Fell Gluttony, you can make it work. But the amount of times that my character, who is nearly 12 out of 12 masterwork on nearly full greater ancestral itemed gear, has failed very expensive runs just because my minions refused to hit any of the targets that were important to the thing that I was trying to do, has gotten to the point where I just stopped doing Undercity for any of the valuable tributes. They recently added in the Citadel as well. Quite literally a precision puzzle-based activity where your minions need to be able to attack very specific monsters who will then drop keystones, or will drop shards, or will drop a reflection disc that you then need to use inside of a mechanic, and then you need to be able to jump through the different portals and come back through, and then the boss monster needs you to kill the ads before you kill the boss monster. And you can't control where your damage goes. You can't make your minions fight who you want them to fight. And the question comes down to why? To Adam Jackson's point, if we add in the ability for minions to be able to be targeted onto specific monsters, it comes along with challenges. Again, the people who just want to play with their brains totally turned off and just go like full mulch mode, they will feel as if they're not able to play in the way that they want because they know they could be more efficient. I'll go ahead and say it. I don't really care that much about that concept because nothing says that they have to be more efficient. And they can just let their minions attack whoever they want. And if that's legitimately what they want to do, if that's how they want to enjoy the game, which is, again, perfectly fine, they get to do that. My inability to target monsters does not somehow further empower their ability to enjoy this fantasy. And here's the other part too. The people who want to be pinpoint precise with minions aren't not going out of their way to do that. They're just doing it without tools. One of the best ways to get your minions to attack the thing that you want is run so far away from them that they actually despawn from where they were and they respawn on top of you, as you'll see happening throughout this Undercity run. And when that happens, they tend to start attacking the monsters within the area around you. Not only that, monsters tend to aggro onto your minions and end up just fighting them off in a corner, which is perfectly fine. You think that's actually good, it saves your life, it's a bit of crowd control, and you're not wrong. The issue being, though, that when all of your minions are dumping a bunch of millions of damage that has nothing to do with the priority you're doing, like at the end of, 5 or 6 different tier 89 pit runs, where I had more than 2 to 3 minutes to clear them out, I only need a minute and a half to kill the boss, I've timed it. But if they spawn ads that don't immediately die or walk close enough for me to crowd control them, they end up just wasting a ton of my minions' damage into targets that ultimately do not win me the day. And in certain areas, especially in boss arenas in the pit, you actually can't run far enough to get your minions to de-aggro from these monsters or to despawn and respawn. So again, there is actually a way to play more optimally. It is this ridiculous workaround where you have to literally force your minions to despawn and respawn. And that's what we have to do. So the same people who wouldn't want to play in a more optimal way aren't doing that as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I understand. It's only the people who actually want to be able to push into the highest content, do the hardest content, or do any of this at a relatively competent level. We just don't have tools to do it. So we are doing it. We're just suffering at the hands of it. And the people who don't want to do it aren't doing it, and they are none the wiser that anybody is even suffering from these pain points. And don't get it twisted. There's no easy answer. Coding is hard. Developing is hard. Because there's a lot of different people that are playing this game. I play on controller. A lot of the issues that I run into are actually kind of controller based. One of them being that I can't really send the golem where I need to send him because it always goes to the closest target in the direction that I'm aiming. So unless there's no monsters in front of me, I can't really send my golem flying into a pack of monsters. He'll end up just kind of standing right next to where he is right now and just kind of activating, as opposed to intercepting, high threat monsters, etc. Likewise, playing on mouse and controller, it would be a lot easier to be able to target a thing and say, hey, attack this. Something that the controller can't really do, but it has a little bit of an option. We have the ability to set a target with our controller. If you see that little red dangling arrow over this monster's name right there, we can actually click in the right thumbstick and that will keep our target on there, because as we move around with the thumbsticks, it will often end up targeting something else. I would love if my minions would attempt to attack the target that I've set my hard lock target to, or whoever the mouse and keyboard player is currently hovering their mouse over for, more than 1 to 2 seconds. Mouse and keyboard, as well as controller players, would both gain this functionality. It would allow for very simple optimization without people having to spam an additional skill or maybe select a group of monsters or something like that, right? Just hovering it, I think, would be a pretty fair solution. But what would I love? Well, one, right now you have to balance this really weird back and forth with minions, which is that you have to invest in their survivability even beyond your own survivability, that they can survive the content that you're doing. After the stat squish, your minion surviving in the early game has actually become very hard because you don't have resistances, you don't have a ton of maximum life. Not only that, but the fact that they can be crowd controlled, that they can be feared, that they can be knocked down, etc., is this weird penalty that you get for playing minions, which is that you are not working any less hard than anybody else playing this game, but your damage in particular can get very specifically punished by things in the game that you otherwise wouldn't be. There's no other ability or class in the game other than, I guess, the druids and their companions that says that their skills just get shut off because a couple monsters happen to have crowd control enchantments on them that just keep wrecking their day. And on top of all of this, it just makes the developer's job harder and harder. All these weird interactions that happen with your minions are almost certainly just more code that needs to get looked through and tested whenever they're trying to update or make an expansion or change these things in some way. So I have the solution. Minions can't be targeted unless they've been taunted. Minions cannot die. Minions cannot take damage. Minions cannot be crowd controlled. You do not have to summon your minions, and minions don't have to be on your skill bar. When you select them in your Book of the Dead, they are now spawned. Bada bing, bada boom. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, while it's easy for me to say, hey, just do this thing and it will work, obviously it comes along with a lot of different repercussions, and I assume it would require the undoing of a ton of code that's already in place. But I beg the question, what does the game gain from my minions being able to be crowd controlled, being able to die, needing to be resummoned, etc.? What gameplay loop is enriching me in this way? And why am I very specifically penalized for using this damage skill on my skill bar, as opposed to every other damage skill in the game? Now, I hope a lot of the frustration that I've experienced both came through, but in a constructive way. I'm not trying to just complain for complaint's sake, and I also don't want to feel like anybody is being attacked here. I don't think the developers have failed us. I don't think that they had a bad vision. I get it, or at least I believe that I can empathize and conceive of the reasons and ways that they were implemented in this way. And I don't necessarily disagree. I just think that it's from a bygone era that the Diablo 4 video game no longer really supports. The game isn't slow and meaningful in the way that it was previously. Combat is fast-paced. Skills need to clear the entire screen multiple times over, even in high-tier content, for people to feel like they are enjoying the game. The new content in the game benefits things that are both precise and full-screen clearing. They benefit you being able to choose when and where you make your strikes, and your build needs to be able to apply your damage effectively. As you add on more complicated and more interesting content to the game, which I absolutely hope that the developers continue to do, these issues are only going to continue to exacerbate on themselves, folding over again and again and again until we're at the point where people just don't play the build because it just doesn't function in the content that you make. And there's no amount of damage you could add to them, I don't think, in a realistic way. In this fight here, very specifically, this example, you'll notice that at this point already, I have 1 minute and 48 seconds left. The boss is more than 50% done. And half of my minions are just fighting things that aren't the boss. Because I have to move to avoid different combat effects and the different shadow bosses, I lose the rigid pattern that my minions were in, and they begin scattering. They begin just shaving their damage off into random directions, and I can't regain access to their focus. A boss that should have died a minute ago, because I have the DPS to do that, ends up having more than half of my army stuck here in the back, dumping hundreds of millions of damage into a random skeleton that spawned near the edge of the map. I fail this Pit 89 run. I did about 6 different times today because of these issues. And I gotta say, as somebody now with, 3,000 hours in the Necromancer, until something vastly different changes, once I finish making this video and maybe my last build guide video when I do clear tier 90, I'm basically never going to return to this archetype because I just refuse to experience this level of frustration again at this level with nothing to show for it. And I hope that that rings through with the meaningfulness that I'm attempting to impregnate it with, because I think that there may be a minority of the player base that agrees with me and are very let down by their inability to play the fantasy that they were hoping to for the Necromancer class, especially coming from Diablo 2, where basically this was all solved here by the addition of the Enigma rune word, because it turns out you couldn't force your skeletons to attack specific monsters there either. They tried to add in curses like Attract to be able to make it work, but that really didn't see a lot of play because it meant that you had to lose the other curse that you would have used. But I'm going down a whole rabbit hole there. Basically, the answer is attempting to fix the minion AI by giving you subpar tools for being able to manage them ends up just leaving them as a non-existent option that then later has to be completely transformed by things like when I teleport or dash, all of my minions teleport on top of me. If that's what it needs to be, sure, I would kind of take anything at this point. But I just wanted to use that to highlight the issue that previous Blizzards and previous Diablo developers have tried to solve in the past. And from what I understand, in Diablo 3, it was pretty good. From what I understand, you could just target monsters and they would go fight them. I would love to see that return. But there you go. That's the end of what is probably going to be one of the least watched videos I've ever put out. I do hope it gets through to a couple different people. If you resonate with any of it, let me know down in the comments. If you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel as well. You are a diehard, and you need to be here for when the Minion Necromancer rises from the dead in its altogether new glorious form, hopefully. But thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that it helped to give words to any frustrations that you yourself might have felt. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.